missing, right?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give it about 1 to 2 more minutes, let people log on and get all their eggs in a row. Thank you so much for joining us. We're also streaming this on Facebook and setting that up as well. So
I have. My sister's calling me on both phones.
oh, maybe the counselor is in the attendees. All right, so we are waiting to get set up on Facebook. Can everybody please mute interim? Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience. We're just having a little bit of trouble streaming on Facebook. So well, we have a lot of people, so just setting that up if you give us a second. Okay, we'll go ahead and start. Thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Michelle Booth. I am with Educate Nevada Now. We are a K-12 public policy organization in Nevada, advocating for adequate resources for all students in the great state of Nevada. And we wanted to host a panel, mostly because we hear a lot about stress and tension in our schools more than ever. Our schools are open again. Maybe we thought it was like, okay, things will kind of go back to normal, and they're not feeling that way. Silly of me maybe to think that, but it feels even more stressful, just as stressful maybe as in the middle of the pandemic, but in different ways. And so the idea was to host a panel with the boots on the ground, the educators, principals, support professionals, counselors, to tell us what's going on. What are you seeing? What's different? Not just now because of the pandemic, but also prior to the pandemic. We're seeing that our K-12 has been in a state of crisis for a while. And also see how us as a community can support our staff, support our schools, and do a better job of just figuring out how we can move forward. So thank you all. And as a reminder, these are, like I said, boots on the ground. These are not the decision makers. So please be very kind. We wanted to have just a natural, organic group. We're not hearing from leadership. We're not hearing from people who are used to doing like the talking points. This is their real experiences. And we're so happy that we're able to share that with you all. This is a statewide panel. So we have people from rural Nevada, from Washoe. So because it's important to know what your sister organizations are, or sister districts, right? Depending on which one you're attached to, are also going through. So that's really important. And so I'm gonna start off by having our panelists introduce themselves. Autumn, can you go first?
Yep. My name is Autumn Tampa, and I am what you call an education support professional. My position is a Title I language and literacy specialist. I work with ELL children in grades 1 through 5, tutoring them in reading and writing to help them get up to grade level.
Thank you. Kaylin.
Hi, my name is Kaylin Evans. I'm an educator in Washoe County. I've been teaching, working at Title I school for the last 10 years.
Deanne.
I came up quick. Sorry about that. I'm Deanne Hicks. I also teach in Washoe County. I'm out at Natchez Elementary School on the Pyramid Lake Paiute Reservation. This is my 28th and a half, I guess a little over the halfway mark year of teaching. All 28 years have been in schools in Northern Nevada and all in Title I schools.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And I'm Jen Loescher. And I just have to say, because Deanne didn't say it in her introduction, she's also the 2022 Nevada Teacher of the Year. Okay, my name is Jen Loescher. Yes, clap, clap, clap. My name is Jen Loescher, and I work for the Southern Nevada Regional Professional Development Program. That's a mouthful. We provide professional learning opportunities for the 5 southern counties in Nevada. And this is my 22nd year in education.
Thank you. And last but not least, Roxanne.
I am Roxanne James. I'm a principal at a Title I middle school, grades 6 through 8, and I am completing my 31st year. And the majority of those years have been actually in high school. The last 11 have been in the middle school ranks. So glad to be on the panel. So thank you.
Thank you all. And we do have a counselor who is scheduled to be attending. We don't know if there's some situation that came up, but if she goes ahead and jumps on later, we'll go ahead and have her introduce herself. So let's just jump straight into it. Let's talk about the pandemic, what the recovery is like for you all. I know we have a lot of students out, we've had educators out, bus drivers, support professionals, everybody's just kind of been struggling. Just, we open, but not everybody's fully there. And if you can talk a little bit about what absenteeism, how you all are managing that, not just students, but staff as well, and how that affects you. Kaylin, you can go first because you have a perfect example right now.
Yeah, so, things, it's interesting when they talk about the impacts that COVID has had. Obviously, a lot of the situation that we're dealing with now existed far before the pandemic happened, right? In terms of the chronic underfunding and under resources and the class sizes. And unfortunately, COVID has just exacerbated the issues that have already existed here in in Nevada, and being in Washoe County and working in Title I schools. I've only worked at a Title I school my entire career. So our students obviously have a lot of challenges outside of the school that they bring. And so a lot of times we're already trying to make up learning gaps that exist with these kids and trying to get them to perform at their peer level. And then, you throw on the impacts that COVID has had, and we're seeing, drastic impacts on learning. So we have gaps that really had never been seen before, where we're having kids that are far below where we would typically see them. And again, when you're working with a lot of these more at-risk populations, they are already having a lot of these learning deficits prior. And again, now we just have it even more so because of COVID and how it's impacted. But again, I think it's important when, the community that's listening to this, what I talk to them, I really want to reiterate is the fact that, these issues were not caused by COVID and the pandemic. They are simply amplified. They existed and they've been here for decades. Nevada schools and education has been chronically underfunded for decades. And now it's just making it much more difficult for us as a state to deal with a lot of the issues that we're seeing, because we didn't have the resources and funding prior to COVID. We had the largest class sizes prior to COVID. Our teacher turnover rate exponentially higher than other areas of the country. So again, these things happened prior, and then you just throw COVID on top of it, and a national pandemic, all these sort of things. And now we're really starting to see the effects and how it's impacting everybody from, counselors and teachers, bus drivers, nutritional services, nurses. I mean, it's top to bottom. Administrators are being stretched to their limits because they're asking more and more to do more with less. And we just can't really continue to do that. It's not sustainable.
Right. And, a lot of people know, that we have the largest class sizes in the country. We equate the pandemic in Nevada being the straw house, right? In this hurricane, we have the straw house. And so the recovery for our state is just that much more challenging. And, things, because of the way our budget works, when teachers get raises, it comes at a cost of class sizes. We saw in 2015 when we had really huge, when we had pay raises for teachers, Nevada went from 7th largest class sizes in the country to the largest, because we had to increase about an average of 4 to 5 students in every class. So it's not a win when it comes with more students. That doesn't even feel like a raise at all. So that's certainly something that is a challenge. We were talking, so just so everybody knows, we had a lot of conversations leading up to this to try to come up with the agenda and what we're going to talk about. But some of the teachers are explaining that we've had so many students absent that sometimes you don't know whether you want to pause the lesson to wait for them to come back, and that sets you behind. But then when you wait for them to come back, others are out, and you're just doing this logistical maneuvering right now. Can somebody talk about that as well? Maybe Deanne or Jen?
I can jump in there. Yeah. I think exactly what you're saying, Michelle. It is really it's been very difficult to strategically plan, like you said, for students who are absent. In some cases, a student might be only out for 2 days, 5 days, 7 days. And it just depends on the extension of the family and the exposure to COVID. So when they come back, how do we catch them up? We know that we just spent the last year doing online learning with lots of students. How did they interact? How did they come? Were they online? Were they in person? And then how did we navigate that as teachers, knowing that we had a loss there? So then now as teachers, we're in a position where we're wanting to make sure that we're catching up what happened that they lost from last year, double that with what they need to learn this year. And then we have students who are absent quite often. And then how do we catch them up, and what does that look like? And ultimately, how do we, and especially I am lucky in the fact that I do not have a large classroom, but for teachers who have classrooms of 25, 30, 70 students, yesterday talking to a teacher who has 600 students a week, how do you manage knowing that these students are missing instruction, and how do you find ways to help fill holes that were already there from before that are now growing larger because they're absent at this time as well?
And when we had this discussion, we talked about the ability to upload lesson plans, right? So that if students are home, they can then, try to catch up, but that takes time. And we're going to touch on later about the crisis in education before the pandemic, because So just because of the pandemic alone, we're uploading, we averaged, when we all discussed it, was about an 8 hours a week average of uploading all of these materials. And then sometimes the kid came back to school and said, I didn't even open it. And, we talked about teacher absences. About student absences. We also have staff absences, right? I think it got as bad as like 20% being out, and you're having to fill, and teachers having to then go in and use the prep periods, give up their prep periods at lunchtime. And that was an average of 3 hours as well. So now you're working an average of 12 hours just from the pandemic. We're not talking about the extra hours teachers, educators are already putting in, and support professionals. Just from the pandemic, it was about 12 hours managing that. Jen, do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to share just a couple of stories that have just recently happened at the secondary level. So definitely elementary and secondary are different in terms of number of students in the classrooms and how many students teachers are necessarily interacting with on a daily basis. And at a middle school earlier in the year, and I know it's still happening, there's been days when they've had over 300 students in the cafeteria because they don't have enough adults on campus. And so it's a combination, right? So it's a matter of when students are out, what's happening, when adults are out, what is happening? How does that impact when we're literally then saying, okay, we literally don't have another classroom for you to go to. There's not another person, human being who is on campus that can do this. So now they're either being funneled into the gym or funneled into the cafeteria for who knows how many minutes out of that school day. How many of those classes that student is enrolled in is that impacting for them on a day-by-day basis? And then I was just at a high school literally today. I've been helping them with some peer observations. And whenever we go into these classrooms, and I'm doing math classrooms, and I'm like, wow, your class sizes are really small. This is exciting. Like, let's talk about this. And they say, Jen, no, over, and I'm not exaggerating, over half. So I know you were quoting the 20%, over 50% of their students are absent every single day. And so now, is that only because of COVID? No, it's not, right? We know there's absenteeism for a lot of different reasons, especially once you hit high school, but that's what the teachers are struggling with right now, is that over half of their students are absent. And it's not just from first period, right? So it's not, some people can say, oh, that's just the first period. They eventually straggle in. And that's true, some do, because with the busing situation, with the busing shortage, many of our students are riding the city bus because they are not able to depend upon the school transportation. And so now that city bus doesn't arrive to drop them off until 45 minutes into the first period. And so yes, do we catch some of our students there? Absolutely. But still, when you go in throughout the day, you're still looking at least 40% of the kids are absent every single day.
And Autumn, I hear of a lot of stories now. The support professionals are becoming the teacher, right? Like, you're managing the class, you're, doing as much as you can. The bus drivers, and we've heard about the bus shortage. Everybody's stretched thin. Can you talk a little bit about that briefly?
Yeah, well, and I'm a Zoom tutor, so we service the ELL students, and what was happening is Zoom was being canceled, the teacher was being pulled, the Zoom teacher, and then also Zoom tutors throughout the school district were being put into a classroom. So you had support staff actually becoming substitute teachers in emergencies for extended periods of time. And then of course the kids, missing. I mean, during the pandemic, I would say what we noticed when we started working with our kids is that everyone's a year behind, which I don't know why that surprises anybody, but we're supposed to catch up 2 years. And I really wish that wouldn't have happened, and we would have just said, let's redo the whole year we missed on the pandemic and keep everybody where they were, but it didn't happen. So we had second graders that didn't know letters and sounds.
Yeah,
so,
really, really tough.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that a lot of people don't talk about that I think is really critical is that you have our special needs children. And you have our special needs aides. And, when you were having 25 out of 75 people absent in staff, those special education children were not getting their needs met according to their IEPs. And there wasn't even bodies in classrooms for a lot of it. It was just, you're doing without those people. And that has been a problem in the past. I think a lot of the issues started way back with the recession, and then they've dominoed now. And then you've got all the COVID protocols, which create a lot of extra work for anybody who's got groups that come in on a regular basis. I'm not sure what the middle school and high schools were doing, but since we have rotating students, we have to basically sanitize our room 8 times a day.
Yeah,
If we want to follow 8 times a day, that's a lot of sanitization. We do it, and we do it gratefully.
One
So
thing I can say about our educators, they dry hands, all our school staff, lots of dry hands from all the work that I think. Roxanne, and you are, as a principal, the ringmaster. I mean, it starts and stops with you. You're the middleman between the administration and the communities. What do you think is your biggest challenge to manage during this time?
You know, grace, quite honestly. You know, when everybody's coming back, the idea that the expectation was, okay, we're back, the excitement, everything is great. But now we're juggling the needs of the community who's begging for their kids to be back, our teachers who want the kids back, but we don't have them all. And now in this time of the year, when it is spring, this is when everybody's tired anyway. And so the personal day, the day off, and it's about ensuring that we are not hitting anybody too hard or working them to a point, and truly the equity piece. Okay, I'm going to ensure, to Autumn's point, that if we've lost a staff member in a special needs area, I'm not going to let that class go more than a day without licensed and without support. And so it's that constant shuffling and juggling. You just throw sometimes that master schedule out and you say, okay, who's up next? And who has the most critical need? Because that's where we are, because we want the best for what our kids, because they're in front of us and they're looking to us to go, I'm here. So help.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to switch gears now to talk a little bit about challenges of support professionals, just in general. A couple stats that I have here. People don't know, support professionals aren't even year-round employees. A lot of times they're only 9-month, 10, 11, or 12-month employees. Some of them only make as little as $11 an hour. To retire effectively, they need to work 5 more years than an average, than another staff person, because they don't work the full 40, the full 12 months. And if there's days off, right, we've got times where they're not federal holidays, they don't get paid for them. So they have to use vacation time if they want to get a paycheck. There's a recent story that came out, I believe, actually, I don't know what news outlet, but support professionals are the 3rd highest rate of employees on food stamps in Nevada. And so they're the ones doing the labor work, right? Our custodians, our bus drivers, our special aides, are the clerk dealing with all the upset parents, calling the teachers, can you fill for this person or that person? It's stressful work, and their hourly wage is not very high. And so there's quite a lot of competition out there. Target, other companies paying a lot more, where I'm sure it looks pretty good to support professionals. I don't think a lot of people know that. I don't think a lot of people know that sometimes bus drivers are only contracted to work 6 hours a day. There was at least in Clark County School District, they gave them a raise. I believe it was $6 more an hour, but that was for starting bus drivers. The ones that were already there didn't get that, and that hurts morale. That's also happened to educators as well, to teachers. So it's just so hard. I think administrators and the principals are like begging, and the teachers, please stay, please stick around. These are people working with our children. So Autumn, can you tell us a little bit about some of the stress factors outside of that, the pay?
well, I do want to let you know that they start at 9:50, not 11.
Oh, I apologize. Okay.
And we can't use vacation time on paid days that we don't get paid. So it's quite a struggle. I think many of the support professionals, people don't realize, have their own families and their own children also to take care of. So while they're working in a school with your children or someone else's children, they have their own families to take care of, just like teachers do. And I imagine and hope that principals do. Not all of them, but I think it's more about the way that we're treated and viewed, as that you do what you're told no matter what, and you're really not treated with the respect that you deserve. When there's a problem, you're blamed for it. I think there's just a lot of issues with climate. And I'm going to say this very respectfully, but there's oftentimes that teachers and principals and other supervisors, administrators do not treat support staff as if they're valuable. They don't make support staff feel appreciated. And during the pandemic, it's been the support staff who has covered 90% of the COVID protocols that had to be put in place. And so not a lot of raises, not a lot of money, not a lot of appreciation. And yet we've been responsible for the majority of COVID safety protocols. And I know that I've broken down more than once. My coworkers have broken down more than once. One walked out and came back, and others walked out and never came back because of the demands without the appreciation and respect. And I know that it's not easy when you're under stress. I'm not perfect, God knows. But I think too, then you've got all of the challenges of the children. And I'm in this job because I love children. I had a higher paying job that I quit in insurance, and I wanted to work with children. And so when I hear of a child losing a parent to COVID, or for years you hear of a child, because I always work in high risk schools, that their parent is incarcerated, or they had to stay home from school to babysit their younger brother or sister. Those are a lot of the unspoken things that people aren't talking about. And there's just so many things that need to be talked about and brought out to the open. And instead of punishing the messenger, we just need to fix the problems. And I think everybody can fix the problems, but we've got to put them out there and say what they are before we can fix anything. And so I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to do that.
And, with our support professionals, if they're bus drivers, they might want to go be drivers for somewhere else that pays a lot more and they don't have to deal with the stress. If they're clerks, they could go be a clerk at an office. There's a lot of these jobs are not as unique to education as it is to be a teacher or a principal. And so guess what? It looks really nice outside of the schools. For everybody, but especially for a support staff as well. And so that's something that
I'd like to just interject there, because for certain positions, but those of us who work with the children directly, when I've gone to apply for jobs, you know what people have said to me? Oh, you don't work a real job. And I'm like, excuse me? Would you like to come and do my job? Because I don't believe that a lot of people could. So there isn't a lot of avenues for those of us who work with children. And people say, oh, well, go get your teaching degree. I don't have the money to go pay for a teaching degree. I'd be in debt till the day I die. So there's newer avenues now, but there has not been avenues for education support professionals, is what we like to start calling ourselves, because we are professionals. I feel like I'm a very good professional. And I think that if we start referring to ourselves as professionals a little bit more, but it's not that easy for us to leave.
Right.
Even under stress.
And even then, statistically, we were just talking about earlier, less people are becoming teachers. I think there's I forget the national organization that said that there's a 20% drop in students wanting to study to be educators. So it's like, that is not the silver lining necessarily that, people are saying. I think I heard a stat and that somebody talked about earlier that for some colleges in Nevada, it's a 30% drop students graduating from the College of Education. So definitely grace for our support professionals at least the bare minimum is something that's really important. So I want to move on now to changes in education. So if people assume, and we started off with it with the pandemic, just because it feels like, somebody mentioned triage. It's really stressful right now, but it hasn't been that great anyway. Things have been very stressful when it comes to education. Things have certainly changed. And so I want to hear from our staff. Deanne, I don't know if you could kick it off about changes that you've seen over your years of experience that have made teaching more stressful for you.
Sure. I love to talk about the early days back. It was overhead projectors, right? And ditto machines. Those were my early years. So lots of changes in materials and the way school has functioned over the years. I think when I first began, we had opportunities to create like thematic units, and we had textbooks, and we followed those just page by page, similar to what is now. We had scope and sequences and curriculum guides and those kinds of documents. However, we also had a lot of autonomy in our classrooms to do what kind of met the needs of our students and met the needs of ourselves as being a creative professional. And then over time, pieces of those just kind of slipped away as other pieces were brought forth. When I first started teaching, the only testing that we did do testing. So even 3 decades ago, we were doing testing. We did ITBS and Terra Nova testing and those kinds of tests for our students, and then moved into CRT testing and now into SBAC testing. And part of that, though, when we tested before, it was out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't data that came back that helped us drive our instruction or think about what kids could or couldn't do. It's a different type of testing. And then when we transitioned to a more standards-based approach to testing, kind of things got ramped up, right? Because then now it's like, did you teach this or did you not teach this? Because now on the test, it shows if kids did or did not master it or have access to it, whichever the case might be. So while testing is a small piece of that, for me, when I really think about it and I look back on 30 years, so much has changed. And I could go, I've given a small amount of examples, but the one thing that has not changed is the amount of time in the day for me to do my job. So the school I started back with in Elko still has the exact same bell schedule that they did on my first day of school all those years ago. And same with my schools here. So a piece of that is as everything else has changed and this gets added to our plate and that gets added to our plate, and there's an expectation that we find time and we find space to do all these other initiatives and projects that come down from above, I guess, in most cases. Sometimes we take those on ourselves as teachers, right? The one thing that has not really expanded and changed with that is what I want to think is maybe the understanding of what it takes to really craft good lessons, what it takes to invest the time to create learning environments where students engage and are challenged, and that really make learning fun. And for me, that's what makes learning fun.
And probably for the students as well.
I hope so, yes.
Kaylin, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing? You talk to a lot of your colleague teachers. You got your ears to the ground. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, where to begin? There's so many elements. I think Deanne hit on a couple ones in terms of, I think the overuse of assessments is one of the biggest factors that is really hindering education. Our hyper focus on standardized testing, and then coupling that with the loss of autonomy for teachers because, and I understand the use of curriculums, right? Like we want to provide tools and resources for teachers, but those are what they should be looked at as tools, right? Like I'm a professional. I'm extremely good at what I do. Allow me to use the tools to craft the most engaging learning experiences that target my students' needs. But that's not what we do. We provide, districts come in and this is what you're teaching, and you're teaching this at this time on this week. Across the district, we want everybody on the same page at the same time, but we're not teaching the same kids. And it gets to the point where if you're expecting a teacher to come in and read from a script and, you know, go to this page and say this, and you guys do this and open to this page and show this video, you know, you're basically saying that a robot could teach these kids. And what we're seeing is that it takes a high, like the vast majority of teachers are highly qualified, creative, talented individuals. And a lot of times our own creativity and talents are hamstrung because we're not allowed the autonomy to really to go beyond what the expectation for our district might be. So I do think, you know, how we use curriculums, we struggle with. And then going back to a little bit of the idea of standards and the idea of assessment, you know, kids, we look at kids nowadays as if they're data points, right? Like our whole focus is this kid is in this quartile and let's get him up to this quartile, or this is a data point, let's get him from here to here. And we're forgetting that they're a child. The holistic development of a child, like our focus is on how well they can cite evidence from a text and read a word problem, right? And do basic equations. But there's so much more to intelligence, and there's so much more to developing young children and their ability to cite evidence. Yes, that's an important skill, of course, we're not saying that, but the over focus, because we're so tied to standardized testing, well, we have to do math and reading all the time, so we're going to cut the arts. We don't have the money, so we have to cut PE. We don't have the money, so we have to cut science programs. Like the things that kids enjoy going to school to do are the things that we immediately take away because, oh my goodness, we need to make sure that, you know, that these other areas are being addressed. And we're getting away from the idea that, like, when did we become okay with school not being fun at all? Like, legitimately, like, why are we okay as a society thinking that school sucks? That kids are like, I don't want to go to school. Like, but we're just like, oh yeah, you know, school sucks, just go to it, it's cool, like get through it, you know, like the weekend's coming. Like, how sad is that like kids are not engaged to go to school? And I think, and obviously that's a broad brush, but like a lot of kids enjoy, because I work at school where the most important place that the safest and best place for them to be is in the school. And, you know, going back to the COVID, where we had a lot of our students spend a lot of time away from school, and that was probably one of the worst things that they could have done, because they needed to be in an environment with structure, with love, with support. So we're seeing the residual effects that that's having. But I think just going back to the idea that, you know, school, you know, our focus as educators should be on fostering creativity and sparking a love of learning, you know, critical thinking, collaboration skills, effective communication, just an overall enjoy of learning. But we've gotten so far away from that because people are making decisions for teachers and what they're doing that aren't in the classroom, right? Like, these people that are making decisions for what we should be doing are lawmakers and legislators that are so disconnected from what we're doing in the classroom. So I think that that's definitely something that's impacted education a lot, at least that what I've seen over the short time.
Thank you so much. And Jen, can you talk a little bit about some of that? Can you actually talk a little bit about some of these unintended consequences of new, I don't know, bills or mandates, and the effect that that has on educators?
Absolutely. I just want to build a bridge for some folks who may be tuning in who I'm just putting myself in the shoes of a non-educator, and I might be feeling some kind of way if I'm hearing teachers say, oh, they want to be creative and this and that. And I'm like, no, I want you to have a safe place and teach my kids so that way they have a chance at the world, right? And so I just want to build a bridge between why are those things so important and why they're so critical, and why they're being exasperated with some of the different teaching conditions, environmental conditions that are existing right now and have been for decades previously. When we as professional educators have those things in our hands, our sense of efficacy and our sense of agency skyrocket. When that happens, that's when we see the greatest gains in student growth and gains towards student achievement. Because when we are able to truly have that autonomy to be able to do what we know is right for students, what is right for the content area, grade level band, whatever it is that we're engaging in, that is truly what feeds that efficacy. That is the antidote to burnout. And we know that we're going to feel overwhelmed at different times during the school year, every year. Like, this is the nature of educator life. But with that, we don't have to get to the burnt out position where we say, now there are teachers who maybe are feeling apathetic. And that's that is so scary. And that's tragic for not only them, but for their students, for their families. And so therefore, how do we prevent that? The antidote is sense of efficacy, sense of agency, and that is directly, explicitly tied to that autonomy and creativity. So I just wanted to create that bridge for folks in case some people might be thinking, yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. So many unintended consequences. And as was mentioned, when bills get passed, then what was the intention of that bill? Great intentions, great thoughts. Our policymakers, our legislators don't sleep at night and dream about how to wreck our lives and how to wreck the education system. I don't believe that in my heart. I don't think that they're like, yes, how are we going to do massive destruction today or in this next session? I don't believe that that's what's happening. However, to your point, that is a phrase that I use often. These unintended consequences do befall us in the classroom with our kids, with our families, when decisions are made with great true intentions, not understanding ramifications with some of the language. Having said that, then the iterations that occur from the state level. So these laws are made at the state level with broad language on purpose, because as Deanne has mentioned as well, our state is diverse. Like Clark County, we feel like Clark County might be the end all be all of the state of Nevada because we're so concentrated here urban wise. Man, there are a lot of rural districts. There are a lot of different charter schools. There are a lot of different schools. We have a one school building that takes care of all grades K through 12. That's the only building in that school district. So we've got the span, right? We've got this amazing state, and therefore the language has to be broad enough so that districts can then decide on regulations for what's best for their districts. Having said that, every iteration causes dominoes to be tipped over and sprung out to where all of a sudden now with this regulation in this district, their interpretation of a certain law and how are they going to make it come to fruition in their district. Then it doesn't end there. You think, oh, just the district level. Oh no, because now at the school level and in Clark County, there's a level in between, whether you call it a region area or an area, they call it different things over different years, but there's that level as well that they interpret. And then they say, they talk to their principals, and then the principals say, okay, how am I going to envision this? What am I going to say to my staff? How is this going to come to fruition on our campus? So all these iterations causes these different regulations, policies, procedures to again come down through the pike. And so we do need more teacher voice at the start. But having said that, even once we do get teacher voice amplified at the level of state law and at the level of district policy and regulations, just there's always, in the nature of the human complex system of education, there will always be unintended consequences. The more voices we bring to the table, like this panel, it's not just of teachers, it's not just of admin, it's not just of support professionals, it's all of us combined and saying, hey, from my viewpoint, what do I see? What's going on here? The more we can get of that will help decrease the number of unintended consequences that befall not just educators, but our students and their families.
And a lot of that has to do with resources. Sometimes you're like, oh, we've now got money for this program, but it's not effective for everybody. And a school district that's maybe a very small school district has to put in, here's $30,000 for a specialist. Well, yeah, but a specialist costs $50,000. So now I'm negative in my budget to provide this. We don't, we've got read by grade 3, great, but it requires more resources than we're probably getting. A lot of policies where it's like, we found money, we're so excited, but it's not enough money for everybody or to do it effectively is what we're finding. And people see that we put this money, so they want to see the results across the board in such a way that is not going to happen because we didn't fully fund it. And Roxanne, I know principals, major burnout across the country. They are leaving the profession. I have spoken to principals who've said, I think they're a married principal couple, we decided not to have kids. We were either going to do this job we're going to have kids because it was too hard. It's so many hours to do this effectively. You're basically overseeing not just the students, but you're trying to keep, everything we're hearing, you're trying to pacify that. The support professionals, the teachers, educators, the parents, the students. Can you talk a little bit about some of these how mandates that maybe weren't thoroughly funded or thought through, and the effect that has on schools?
Different effects on different schools, because every school has a different DNA scale and it affects everyone differently. So I can speak to my knowledge and my experience, but I really wanted to tie a thread together that I'm hearing, and I think it's important to talk about. We've talked about absenteeism. We've talked about teachers not going into the profession. Kaylin eloquently said, we don't get to be creative anymore, and it's being robotic. And some of the mandates cause that, right? And one thing that we've not brought up, and I want to make sure that we do, because I heard the agency from Deanna and Jen, okay? We forget that students too need that agency. And if we could pull the legislators in and start not from policy, but from the child, whole child, Kaylin, I'm there with you, then we're building from the most centralized focus, from the most important focus up. Our kids aren't coming to school because they don't see the need. If all of a sudden they start saying, wait a minute, I have a voice in what I'm learning or how I learn it, rather than a program script that somebody thoughtfully bought to say, I'm trying to take work off of your plate, certainly, but our teachers want to be creative. I mean, come on, they're all, that sage on a stage. They're going to perform, and they do that through the magic of what they create for kids. You create that for kids. Kids are going to go, oh, like I did in second grade, and said, I want to be that. I want to make fun and magic every day. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our future teachers in front of us, and we can program them to death. We can test them to death, or we can start validating their voice and choice, our teachers and our support professionals, because I'm sorry, they're our front line. They're the ones that actually say hello to our parents the very first thing on the phone, etc. Everybody has something that they bring to the table. If we are mandating things, we lose that magic. And ladies and gentlemen, that in terms of education is what we need to get back to. It's what was magical about those K-12 one room places that I'm the third generation Nevadan. I graduated from a Northern Nevada high school, and I did okay, but I also was the first graduating class that was mandated to test out of high school, right? The one test, and then now you can go, okay, when was that? I can figure out how old she is, all right? But the idea is, if we stop letting our educators come to the table, if we stop not allowing our kids to say, you know what, I'd rather do this on computer. No, I want to do it. I want to do it with my friend on paper. I want to be able to sing it. I want to be, if we don't give them that, we're out of it. And so, and I don't want to speak to it, but I think the exhaustion we're all feeling and stress is the disappointment that in the pandemic, we were expecting change. Now's the time we get to come back and change. And we tried to stuff ourselves back into that old wagon and that horse, and we're trying to still do the same things. And so if we're going to get better, okay, and I'm a policy person, I believe in I believe in it, but I believe in education in a way that says we really need to do this differently and trust the people who are doing it already. They're the best. These people here, they're the best.
And we were talking about, other things that make school fun, arts, science, other things that, on top of the math and all the stuff, I'll admit it, I did not like school. I liked the fun electives. And those are sometimes the first things that we cut. Because they're not the required things, right? Kids need to learn the math, the basics, and we cut a lot of those things. One of the what we're seeing, when we compare, we've been talking a lot about back in the day, back in 1975, Nevada used to fund students at the national average. Now we're 50th in the nation. We talked earlier, all the teacher, all of us when we got together, we talked earlier, and I think it was you, Deanne, who said, there's all of these things that we've always had, the IPs, all of these things that we used to do, that we had people that would help. And now we still have to do them, but we don't have the people to help. I have to do that on top of that. We talked about paperwork with the F grading policy, really good intentions, right? They think the minimum F, right? If the student gets an F, you have to do so much paperwork to say, this is how I'm helping the kid. This is how this is happening. There's not extra time for that. And so maybe you're not going to get the F. Who knows? Maybe you are. But it's just, it really puts a lot of pressure on teachers. And, it's not all about pay, but we understand, also like teachers are struggling, when you get a 3% raise in an economy where we have inflation, and that's not even every year, right? We've seen, especially in Washoe, actually, cost of living is even higher as far as home prices. The median price for a home is $500,000. No way a teacher's going to afford a home. We're in Vegas, they're seeing that as well, right? We're seeing prices going up as well. And now you've got incoming teachers. It's not something where they're making ends meet. When we look at over the last 10 years, when you adjust for inflation, because we're talking about inflation right now, funding has actually decreased when you adjust for inflation, negative 0.3. Yes, Kaylin.
Yeah, and I sorry, I get a little eager to jump in on those sort of topics, because I think that it's really important to like paint a clear picture of really what's going on, because we talked about, support professionals. I don't even know how you could possibly be a support professional and like raise a family or like pay rent on just a normal, like that's beyond, so that part goes without saying. But now we're starting to see that even with teachers, right? Because you talked about how support professionals have other options. Teachers are realizing that now too. Like, I think for a long time, like, teachers, no one got into teaching to make money, right? Obviously, they got into it for the love of children. But what's happening is because of there's so many other factors that are taking away from their ability to make an impact, right? Like, we deal with a lot of these issues because we know we're making an impact on our students, right? And that fills us back up. So it's something like, it's a give and take that we're able to do. But now there's so much being piled on teachers, and they're not able to have that impact. They're not able to make those connections with their students like they used to. And so many factors that are leading to just the overall working climate. But now you have it where every profession is hiring. And I'm a college educated with a master's degrees. I have an equivalent of almost 2 master's degrees, right? Like, if I like, any teacher are extremely talented, like, and to think that they can just teach is really, it shows a lack of understanding, because they're extremely organized. They're good at working with others. They can facilitate a lot of different avenues. And so they have options now. You have other industries that are seeking hard to find teachers. And you talked about cost of living in Washoe County and and pay raises. Just since this was prior to 2021, from 2000 and I want to say 15 to 2018, we had a 21% increase in cost of living here in Reno, right? We had increases to PERS during that time. We've had multiple increases to our insurance. I think we've had a total of about a 7% pay raise. So based on inflation and cost of living, teachers make less now than they did 12 years ago. And so just ask any professional, say, hey, you're going to work at a job, and in 12 years, you're going to make technically less than you do now. Do you want to do that? Like, so it gets to the point too now with the cost of living where you could get by. It was okay. Like, I loved my job. I could get by. It's okay. But now you said our median housing price is $560,000 here in Washoe County. You can't afford being a first-year teacher. If you don't own a home, you're not buying a home. And the solution to that is being presented now. Like, our own mayor came out, I get the intention, but their solution was, we need to buy this rundown old hotel room hotel downtown. Let's renovate it, and we can do low housing income for teachers. So now it's like, we're low housing employees, right? Like, we're a profession, a college educated profession that needs subsidized housing. Or one of our school board members one of our options could be providing trailers for teachers to live in. We could purchase trailers and put them up at an RV park, and that way they can live. Like, that's our solutions, as opposed to saying, you know what, hey, why don't we pay them a livable wage? No, our solution is subsidized housing for teachers. Like, if that doesn't indicate where we are as a state, like, I can't begin to think about how we're going to get young, talented, passion-driven people to get into this profession. Like, there's so many options, and they're going to choose something else. So,
and I do want to touch on that, because it is not my opinion, but as I read threads, oh, boohoo, everybody's dealing with it. It's, we're all, but here's the thing, for a lot of professions, okay, you go find competition. Somebody else is going to pay me, I'm going to go. But what happens when teachers go? That affects our kids. And that's why it's important to all of us. We don't want sure, oh, competition's good and this and that. We want our teachers to stay. We want more teachers to come in. That affects us in a way that does not, that other positions, maybe it's not the same thing, right? Like, I'm, somebody that works in public relations or an accountant, like, oh, I'm going to go take my business elsewhere. And the industry then changes, but we don't want our teachers to go elsewhere. And so the idea then that that's why it's important. Everybody deserves a livable wage. Everybody deserves a wage that is competitive to their professional skill set, to their education, to their years of experience. Absolutely. But for our educators and all our staff and everybody at school, if they go elsewhere, who's going to be there for our kids? And that's why it's so important that we properly support our schools. And we're running out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through everybody real quickly. If you could tell us a little bit, what can the community and what can parents do to support, and what would you like to know from them? And we'll take questions at the end that you can maybe use to help your own students. And we'll start by who I'm seeing on my screen, Jen.
Beautiful. Okay, so number one, communicate, right? Communication is key. Brene Brown, clear is kind. So being able to communicate with your school, if your school has not asked you what the best way to communicate with you is, please advocate for yourself and tell your school what is the best way for them to be able to communicate with you, whether it's from the school, from the teachers, whatever level that is. Let us know, because I know not everyone wants emails, not everyone wants text, not everyone wants to sign up for another app, whether it's the Remind 101 or something else. And so let us know, because most of us will try to adhere to whatever method is best for us to be able to, we just want the communication. And with that communication, then communication with your kiddos. Communicate with your babies, like talk to them about don't just say, hey, how is school? Because you know what, as a middle schooler, I'm going to be like, nah, I hate it. Or I'm going to not say anything at all to you, right? And so look for different questions that you can ask your kids to be able to engage. Find other ways that don't cost money, that don't require you to necessarily delve in deep to something else. We don't want to take your time. We want your time to be spent fostering that relationship, that amazing love that you have for your child, that we have for them as well, but being able to support that learning that's occurring at home. I know teachers oftentimes will share out ideas, but sometimes just seriously talk to your kids about it, and then talk to them about what you learned in school. Think back to your days as well, because I know some people think math has changed, but it really hasn't. I promise. And so talk to them about what you've learned, what you had learned. Have them do crazy things with numbers. Have them look at the digits on a clock and be like, okay, how can we manipulate these numbers to make them either add up to each other or subtract or divide? Do silly fun stuff like that with them. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas pumps, woo, because we were talking about gas prices. When you go to get the gas prices, talk about like, how much is it? How many gallons of gas are we going to be able to put in? And how much is it going to cost? And just engage in those sorts of conversations with them. It is amazing what happens with the connection to learning.
Okay, Roxanne?
I have to piggyback on one thing Jen said is, once we do get your information, would you make sure you update it? Because you might change but we don't know. So that's clear. I'm going to ask for I'm going to go global state policy kind of thing. Okay. parents and community, educate, ask us, we'll talk to you, find out what testing really should be. So we quit spending so many billions of dollars, and we can reallocate those monies to pay our professionals the wages they deserve, because the programs and the tests are not going to teach their kids. It's not going to teach your kids. We're not afraid of tests, but it's all we do now. We get ready for the test, we review the test, we look at the data from the test. That's not what we want for your kids. What we want is, let's get the one test, go for the one test, if you will, and take the billions of dollars and quit spending it to the companies who are making a great deal of money from our states, and put that money into our professionals, our support professionals, our teaching professionals, our educators, because if we don't, you're not going to have us here anymore. And it's not about, oh, we deserve this, we deserve this. The money's there. Quit spending it on stuff that really is not helping your child.
Autumn, what would be your one thing you tell the community or parents?
Well, I think that for me, what I see is that children are children, they are not adults. So I believe that parents need to help their children organize and structure more. Check with your child and see what their homework is. Help them set a routine. Make sure they bring their library books back to school. Ask them what they need help with. It's great to engage and do the fun stuff, but I think, I hear this a lot from teachers and from administrators. Oh, well, it's the responsibility of the child. Well, I believe it's the responsibility of the parents to help their child, because they are children, they are not grown adults. And that's the one thing, and I agree with everything that everybody else has said 100%, but that's the one thing I don't hear. It's like, oh, the child has to be responsible. They have, and they are children. The adult has to be responsible for their child.
Right, and everybody is stressed, parents at home as well. Everybody is really stressed, but we need to definitely look out for our kids. So we can all take the time to just pause and say, like, what does my kid need at home as well? Certainly very important. Kaylin?
It'll be better in the long run.
Yes.
Yeah, and I apologize, I had to get off video. It's just I coach basketball for the Boys and Girls Club, and I had to leave practice to come and do this, and it's getting dark, and I look like a shadowy figure if I put my video on. So I thought it would just be, I'm still here. So sorry, you just can't see me. Yeah, and a lot what everybody said. And Roxanne, just real quick, I imagine that the teachers underneath you really enjoy working for you, because I love the things that you're saying, especially, as an educator, to hear administrators say those things. In terms of what parents can do, absolutely being engaged with the school, but also understanding the impact that your school district board has on policy and what their priorities are, like, kind of piggybacking with the testing, the amount of money that we spend on things that are not necessarily beneficial for our students that we could be using to in other areas is an absolute. But also your lawmakers, like your state lawmakers, have to hear from you, and they have to hear from you continuously. It's not enough to just say, like, kind of sending the kids to school and saying, hey, we're good, or hey, I voted on this or that. Like, we need parents, because, teachers and educators and people in the schools, we're going to be advocating, but the lawmakers listen to the community, right? They listen to their constituents, and they listen to people coming and saying, like, education has to be a priority in our community. And there's nobody that can, this isn't just my opinion. When you look at the way that we support education, there isn't a single metric you can point to at a state level that tells us that we adequately support education in our communities. And so that's because the community itself has to make it a priority with their elected officials. And so the more that we can communicate with our elected officials, that we can advocate for them, and making it certain that it is the top priority in our state, then we're going to start seeing changes, at least from a funding and resources. Because when you're 50th in the nation of funding, you can't tell me that we adequately support education in our state.
Exactly. And Deanne?
So I would just ditto everything for sure that everybody has said. Can you say it a little bit louder for the people in the back, right? So I think these messages need to continue to just move forward. As a classroom teacher, I would ask parents to engage in the classroom. And I don't mean coming in and making copies. I mean, just having conversations with your child's teacher. They have to be long conversations. It can be a hello when you pick them up. It can be a goodbye, how's your day? If you have their telephone number, if you have their email, a quick email that says, hey, we appreciate you. Thanks for what you do. If there's something going on in your family, we don't need to know all the details, but just a little email in the morning that says, you know, Deanne's struggling this morning. She's going to need a little extra time to get her feet underneath her. Those things help us in the classroom to help your students re-engage and to be there and to feel safe and to want to learn with us. So that relationship that I have with my students is not just between the two of them. You are a partner in that relationship and you are an important piece of that. And with you in there, then you'll be able to hear from your teacher their needs in terms of what is the testing doing, what do the legislators need to hear. You'll be able to hear it right there from there and what it means to your school and to your children.
That's wonderful. I text my teachers, well, my kids' teachers, whenever I go on a Costco run. What do you need? It's always gallon-sized bags and whatever else they may have. And they give me homework like I, every so often I'm like, hey, do you need me to cut anything out? My daughter's in kinder, so it's little stuff like, oh, you can cut this out and prep. So it's always important to do what you can. I want to acknowledge that we did not have our counselor attend. Also a very important piece, and maybe we do something in the future, we make sure we have counselors. But for everybody who's on and doesn't know this, our counselors in Nevada, of course, we have one of the highest ratios, 450 students for every counselor in Nevada, when the recommendation is 250, which still seems high to me, honestly. And Nevada, they're responsible for the academic development, the career development, the social, emotional, and the equity development. Those are their roles. Imagine a 450 kids, and that's an average, because when we talk about that, I hear counselors say, oh, I've got a lot more than that. Because that factors in elementaries or rurals that are smaller. So there might be a counselor with 600 kids. All those 4 areas seem a lot for me to just deal with my own 2 kids. So I don't even know. Again, another area that we're short-staffed, it's an area that we didn't talk about because that panelist did not make it, unfortunately, but I also wanted to make sure that we left with that. I have an ask as well as we close. Educate Nevada Now, along with Kalen and his group, are part of a campaign called Empower Nevada's Future. And we want Nevada to be at the national average in funding. Right now we rank 50th, and nobody wants to be average. That's not a goal, but I guess that would be a good goal for Nevada, sadly, and then we go higher, right? But we encourage everybody to go to empowernevadasfuture.org and sign our pledge to ask people to, and our state leadership to say, hey, we want to be at least at the national average in funding. Our students deserve at minimum that. So that is my ask. I want to thank everybody that all our panelists. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for our community who listened in, all our parents. I think the biggest message I heard here was communication and support, and a lot of grace, because we had a lot of talking sessions up to this, and there's a lot of people yelling and stressful. Let's give all our staff some grace. How you doing? Buy them, I don't know, here's an extra like Starbucks $5, whatever. I made, one teacher mentioned once like, oh, this mom made me tamales and it was the best thing in the world. Whatever we can do to let our support staff and our support professionals and our teachers and our principals and everybody in between, that we do appreciate them, because we need them. We need them to be happy so that our kids can go into an environment that is also really happy for them. And to our state leadership in our community, it's time that we fund our students at least at the national average. It's embarrassing that we're 50th in the nation. So please go to empowernevadasfuture.org, sign our pledge, and help us get there and let our leaders know that we do care about our schools and we want our schools and to be adequately funded. Thank you all.